Hey, everybody, Patrick Connor here, and welcome to the Knuckles and Gloves podcast. We're doing some history today, which means I'm here with my dude, Aris Pina, who's a CompuBox operator and also a fellow fight history lover like myself. Aris, how you doing, man?
Doing really good, bro. We had a fun weekend of fights like we always do. Summertime is finally hitting, which is feeling nice out here. I don't have to like be wearing hoodies and just general coldness and shit. So yeah, I'm actually in good spirits.
It's starting to kind of like pick up. The weather's picking up a little bit, things hopefully looking up. They're definitely looking up in boxing.
Totally.
Out here in the Pacific Northwest, dude, like if it's not raining, it's glorious. And it hasn't been raining, so we're good. But
Good, good.
we're in the midst of a nice spell of boxing, like we were just saying. And this coming weekend, dude, we got Gervonta Tank Davis against Rolando Romero. Should be, it's a funky matchup. It's definitely a funky matchup. I know a lot of people are looking forward to it for what we're talking about today. The trash talk. The trash talk has just been, it's been a big part of the narrative. So we're talking
Especially on
about,
Raleigh's side, man. That dude can
yeah,
talk a lot of shit.
he's definitely been jibber jabbering for sure. And that's what we're talking about today. Some of the greatest trash talkers of all time. But real quick, that's what we're inspired by. We're inspired by the Tank Davis versus Raleigh Romero fight. I mean, just real quick before we get to the history, though, what do you think about that fight this weekend?
It's gonna be a fun fight, man. The more I watch the All Access show, did a little bit more research. Tank is my favorite active fighter to watch. Him and Chocolatito, and because Tank is can't miss, right? You always know you're gonna get a good fight out of him. Either he's gonna knock the hell out of his opponent. He might struggle a little bit. It's always a good atmosphere. It's just a lot of fun to watch. And Romero is a guy that came on the scene recently over the past few years. He's been, kind of more like an eccentric figure that no one really knows how to really make of him nor take him seriously, but he's carved, a pretty decent resume for himself since then. Sure, he picked up one of those, BS secondary WBA titles or whatever it was that they had flowing around at one point, but as we've discussed before on the show and other times, if you have one of those secondary titles, no matter what, that's still going to raise your stature and you're going to get a big fight out of that. Look where Romero is now. So after the WBA decided to cut all the interim champions out or regular champions or whatever the hell was going on after they got in deep shit with the Mikhail Fox fight, Romero was one of those champions that got stripped. But all those guys that got those titles taken away were automatically installed as number one contenders. Romero and Davis were scheduled to fight, what was it, this past summer?
Yeah, it was something. I think I can't remember when exactly.
Oh no, in November or whenever it was. It was around.
It was last year in any case.
And Romero got caught up in a bunch of legal issues where he was accused of rape and some other stuff going on. But that brought, so he was excluded from that fight. I think that's when Isaac Cruz got the fight instead, right? Wasn't he the replacement? Yep. That ended up being a hell of a fight too. One of the best fights of 2021. And that rose Cruz's stature. Look at where he's at now at the lightweight picture. So back to this fight. Romero, since then, I guess the charges were dropped or whatever may have happened. And at that point, well, he got installed back then. Regardless of what you think of him, regardless of his controversies outside the ring, his mouth is what really brought him here too. I mean, he's a fun personality in the ring. He makes for good fights. But, the guy is a major league trash talker, like big. And he's been calling out for Tank for a long time. They both, fight under the Mayweather banner. So they've seen each other in the gym for a while. This is kind of something that's been brewing. They've been the same weight. And Romero's been pushing his buttons for a while. The last time he appeared on Showtime when Jim Gray interviewed him after the fight, and they asked him, hey, who do you want to fight next? And he was like, I want to fight Tank. He was like, I want to fight Gervonta Davis. I want to knock him out, yada, yada, yada. And Gray was like, do you think you're ready for that? And he was like, yeah, of course I am. And there was no sense of like trepidation. It didn't seem like he was just putting on a show. He totally looked like he was serious.
Yeah. He seems like he believes the trash that he talks.
Totally yeah. Like I said, he's a very eccentric personality. And someone, it's hard to really read or whatever, the way he talks, but like he totally believes in himself in this fight. Like you can see it when he's not just talking, like he really thinks that Davis is just a small guy that he's going to be able to beat up and he's too strong for him. And I think their styles are going to make for a really good fight when it comes down to it. They've already been trash talking a little bit. Davis has been much more like talkative than usual he's kind of more, despite his personality and his stature in the sport now, where he's like a major draw and whatever, he's still kind of a reserved guy. You hear him in interviews and everything. He's kind of low key the way he talks and all that. And this fight, he's been really barking back. Like you can see it. He doesn't like Raleigh as well. So at the pre-fight, at the press conferences that they had, they've been going back and forth already. Romero talking shit to him, Davis going back and forth. You can see it's heated. This is legit. They really do not like each other. And like I said, with their styles meshing together, this is going to make for a fun-ass fight. Like, it's can't miss. It's definitely not going to go to the distance. And with it being at the Barclays Center, I can tell you that's going to be an incredible atmosphere.
Yeah, as far as the Barclays, reports are coming in that the fight is going to be breaking some attendance records for Barclays, which
for boxing, right?
For boxing, which reinforces. I want to talk about the Raleigh Romero stuff in a second, and I won't get too far into it, but I do want to say that I think that it has been difficult for many people in boxing to buy the narrative, if I'd say, that a number of premier boxing champions fighters are stars or superstars. For some reason, a number of really prominent writers and pundits really want to push back against that and insist that Gervonta Davis is not a star, that Jermell Charlo is not a star, that Errol Spence is not a star. And it's like, I think that now we can, not so much the Charlo fight, but also I think that was just kind of sandwiched between like too much big boxing and like the attendance wasn't what these other fights were, but was still good. But in any case, all of these shows, the buzz behind them, the attendance and everything, they've clearly demonstrated that a number of these fighters are stars. They are, whether you like it or not, they are. Whether or not they continue to win and climb the pound for pound ladder, I guess, is another story. But without question, Gervonta Davis against a guy like Raleigh Romero, especially, is demonstrating that he's got star power. He's a lot of people's favorite current fighter for a reason, yours included, because he is the kind of fighter where it's like once he gets into a rhythm and starts opening up, he's scary.
Totally.
He's the kind of guy where like he starts punching through the target and it's like, holy fuck, dude. Like, holy shit, like heads are snapping every which way. It's scary. It's frightening. And that kind of stuff is, it's definitely eye catching. A lot of people want to see it. And so it's good. I think that he's clearly proving to be a star when a lot of people in the wake of, not to just name drop these stupid ass easy to pick names and Floyd Manny, but as soon as they started kind of fading out, people, like every generation of fighters, say, where are the superstars? Where are they? Where are they? There's no stars in boxing. Look around, and look, there are. Chill. Like, there's no good fights anymore. Anybody saying that's stupid. There's good fighters. There's good fights. They're everywhere. And Gervonta Davis is one of these good fighters. So yeah, it's good to see that this is, almost certainly going to be a very successful show at Barclays this weekend. Also, especially because many people were saying, well, can Gervonta Davis sell outside of here or outside of this city or this region? And it's showing that he can. So in any case, to rewind slightly, just because, I just don't want to skip over it and act like I don't care. We don't want to say anything about it. But as far as Raleigh Romero, I guess I would say that the entire situation with his allegations sucks. And the only reason why I'm bringing it up is because obviously in general, I would encourage anybody to believe survivors and victims and accusers. But like I said, the reason why this figures into the pre-fight talk is because Showtime and Premier Boxing Champions, I don't know who made the final decision, but they did what was, really the kind of honorable thing that you would not expect from fight promoters or networks or anybody in charge who has say. And as soon as the allegations came up, And as soon as they were being investigated and seemed, somewhat substantiated in terms of that the allegations were being investigated, I mean, they pulled the plug. And so I think that for the people who are complaining about this fight and saying like, well, we got Isaac Cruz, like, what, why are we doing this shit? Like, why are we going through with this? Because they already canceled that fight, like we're kind of moving on here.
Yeah.
Well, I think that this is like, they had promised this fight, and perhaps in part to Romero. And then when, as far as we know, the charges were dropped, Showtime or PBC, again, I'm not 100% sure, but whoever it is making good. And they're saying, well, we pulled you out and we were supposed to make this happen. So now we're making it happen. And on top of that, it's the kind of fight where the trash talk is heavy. And that alone, the trash talk alone, is going to turn some heads. So look, it's a tough thing to talk about. It's awkward. How I talked about it probably was not the greatest either, but it's not easy to talk about, and not a lot of people are even going to address it at all. It's a part of the this entire narrative that's not going to come up in the promotion as much as possible, because who the fuck wants to talk about it? Now that we're done talking about it, the trash talk, like I said, the trash talk is one of the big, actually, before we move on too much to the history, what do you think is going to happen with Davis Romero?
It's gonna be an awesome fight for as long as it lasts. I don't expect it to last that long, but at the same time, man, I wouldn't be surprised. Like, I think Romero's gonna surprise some people in terms of, like, I think most people think that Raleigh's gonna get blasted in 2 rounds or so, and that might just happen too. Could happen. But I think that Davis is gonna take his time trying to, because like I mentioned earlier, Romero is kind of awkward, and he has kind of a style. He's going to wade in, and he is a strong guy. He's strong and he does hit hard. So Davis is going to take a couple of rounds just to, figure out what he's doing with it. And then from there, it's going to become a firefight. At some point, Raleigh's going to get in there and try to like grapple with him or do something. And once he starts with that, that's when, Davis is going to fire back one of those monster counter punches. So should be fun. If you really want to categorize Romero in terms of like, well, one with trash talking, in terms of like, in terms of like pure awkwardness, you could look at someone like Ricardo Mayorga. You know what I mean? I wouldn't say that Romero has the exact style like Mayorga. Like Mayorga was like a whole different animal in terms of strength and aggression, especially like early on when he like first came on the scene, knocking around Six Heads Lewis and beating up Vernon Forrest and such. But like before all the excesses really caught up to him and the beatings in the ring, that dude was an absolute beast. And the strength that he had and his awkwardness and the way he would wade in, his unpredictability, made him a tough commodity for anybody. That being said, I think Romero is going to be tough for a few rounds for Tank to adjust to. But once he figures it out, then that's when it's going to become a firefight. And once that happens, I think Tank ends up stopping him. I think in the mid to late rounds.
I think that's a pretty fair assessment, dude. I think that it might be a little bit earlier than that, but I think that overall that the kind of like the arc of the fight is, I see the same thing, because we could see a situation where a free swinger gets caught in between his punches, especially from a guy like Gervonta Davis, who is a fairly aggressive counter puncher. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see him sparked or something like that, because Gervonta Davis has big power. He has pound for pound level power. But like you said, and like you mentioned, Raleigh Romero has just kind of a funky style, an awkward style, the kind of delivery that's not textbook or orthodox, and that can be tough to time. That can be tough to adjust to.
Look at the way he, like, you see him training, even when he's walking and all that, everything about him is completely off. Like,
yeah, it's awkward. It's like he's
awkward,
just
man.
A weird dude in general. And
so if this was jazz, he's total avant-garde.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, he's some shit where the time signature is just all over the place. You don't know where it is. But like, it's really tough to adjust to fighters like those, especially if they can punch. And that makes that adds an extra layer to having to figure out that style, which is already difficult to figure out. But my guess is that Gervonta Davis will settle in, will figure it out, and probably will stop him. But how much trouble he has along the way, that's kind of the question. Raleigh Romero is only like 13-0, 14-0, something like that. But he has a high knockout percentage. So anytime anybody as an opponent has a high knockout percentage, dude, you got to watch out. You definitely got to watch out. So
And Tank admitted as much. He said that, he knows that he's a hard hitter, so he's not just gonna go out there and try to Mike Tyson him really quick. But I'll tell you what, he's a vicious finisher as well. Like you said, not only being one of the hardest punchers in boxing, if he gets you hurt, man, once he's a shark. He just gets in there and finishes you off. And he's a beautiful finisher, man. It's gonna be a brutal fight. Barclays is gonna be popping that night, and I guarantee you there's gonna be some brawls in the audience.
He's got a high knockout percentage himself. So I mean, I'm not talking that down either.
Yeah.
But regardless of the result, something that you hear people say or see people say, read people say, when we talk about mythical matchups and potential matchups and stuff like that, every so often someone will say, "Oh, that would be worth it for the trash talk alone." And so, like Gervonta Davis and Raleigh Romero, perhaps not quite on that level, but the trash talk definitely inspired us to talk about some of the greatest trash talkers, greatest smack talkers in history. So, I mean, there's actually a number of names. Like I thought I could only think of a couple at first, but then when I started kind of like really going down, I was like, oh shit, oh yeah, that guy said this. Oh yeah, and I remember that fight when this. So there's a lot to talk about. Who is one of the greatest trash talkers in history?
I'm only just bringing him up just to finish it off because I literally just brought him up a second ago, but just to finish the point on Mayorga, I guess, right? I mean, when he came on the scene in the early 2000s, as much as we've seen trash talkers throughout history and all that, there was something different about him that from anyone else. Like he just brought it to like a different level of just being an asshole and just really just pure macho, whatever you want to call it. Like there was very few guys that lit up smoking cigarettes right there on television immediately after a fight, bragging about it, saying everything he was gonna do, never really respecting his opponent after the fight. I mean, we've seen Duran do stuff like that, but like Mayorga was just a total brand of just, And then how else would you describe it to, man? Like the way he would act at weigh-ins. That can be a psychological thing. All right, you're struggling to make weight. Mayorga gets on the scale, he's eating an apple or he's eating a chicken wing over there and laughing at you while he's making weight and still eating, and you're just sitting there and you're like, fuck. So it's
I don't remember which one was which, but one of the Vernon Forrest fights, he ate a chicken, a drumstick, and then another Vernon, the other one, he ate a piece of pizza.
Totally. Yep. I've seen that.
I don't remember which one was which. I just remember that on both, which in and of itself, I mean, I never made weight for fucking shit, not since I was a teenager. So I'm not trying to say, but I've been around fighters enough to know that when they're in the process of making weight, they're awful. It's terrible. It's hell. Like you don't want to be around them. They don't want to be doing it. And then, like we've seen, especially with mixed martial arts, it's more prevalent, but in boxing too, dude's half dead going to the scale and then just pounding Pedialyte and shit immediately afterwards, and shit like that. And so that's probably more like common than not, really. So to have your opponent on this high level fight going up there just eating a bunch of fucking bullshit and talking and like flipping you off and stuff like that as you're doing it, like I'm not saying that Vernon Forrest was like weak-minded or anything. I'm just saying that I could see that affecting you psychologically for sure.
I remember I used to train with a kid when I was young, this kid named Casey. And at the Junior Olympics, at the local ones that was held because the New England ones were held in New Bedford. And I remember one time before his fight, he was sitting there, and this was before a weigh-in, by the way. All right, we're all just sitting there at the weigh-in area. And Casey's sitting there, and he was hungry, and his dad brought him a McChicken and a large fry, and he was actually eating it, and he's going to town on this, and everybody else is kind of looking at him, including me, and there's like a couple of kids in way like, hey man, how are you even eating that? And he was like, because I'm hungry. And then after he does, he gets on scale, and like he's still weighed a pound or two below, and everyone was just kind of like, what the fuck? And then he went out there and whooped some kid's ass that night, I remember.
King.
Yeah.
Future fucking king. Yeah. I mean, it's just the kind of thing where I couldn't imagine that type of psychological torture. And then on top of that, Mayorga's calling Vernon Forrest, like he's calling him my son and shit like that. Like, you're my son, like going into the rematch and shit. Like, man, he
And
was
then the
just
stuff he would do, like, and that's the reason why he would parlay that into all kinds of different future gigs. Because even after he lost to Corey Spinks, when what was deemed an upset back then, immediately afterwards, instead of like kind of going on the back burner, when Felix Trinidad decided to make a comeback, guess who was put in that position? Mayorga. And Mayorga right away, no one had gotten under Trinidad's skin like that besides Bernard Hopkins. Hopkins had to throw down the flag of Puerto Rico for him to like really get that, you know, a reaction out of Trinidad that few could. Mayorga didn't have to do all that. Mayorga just had to run his mouth again. All this stuff, Trinidad, you're this and that, you're a bitch, all kinds of other stuff he was calling him, running, going over and over and over and over. Trinidad is fuming by the night, you know, at MSG. And then to top it off again, what was that? Round one. Mayorga sits there. Trinidad, boom, lands a left hook. Mayorga drops his hands, starts doing the whole like sticking his chin out, right? Boom, hits him with another left hook. And then boom, hits him with another one. Mayorga actually starts doing a jig with his legs. And everyone's going absolutely wild. I couldn't even imagine.
Mayorga says it's a trick.
Yeah.
Because you could see the punches come. Fucking Larry Merchant. Yeah, dude, that was fucking great. I remember going to watch that at a friend's house live, and we had like maybe like 10 of us or something like that in like the living room watching, and we were like, "Oh shit!" You know, as soon as that happened, we were like, "Oh shit, man!" But those kinds of antics, you know what I'm saying? Like Ricardo Mayorga, love him or hate him, and a lot of people hated him. I never really liked him. I thought he was kind of, you know, strayed too far into dickish, like, you know, like was funny sometimes, and then at other times was like kind of cruel. I was like, God damn. But yeah, he
And
he'd
anyone that's like,
you
I think
going.
he was accused of assaulting Alexis Argoyo one time.
Wasn't he dating Alexis Arroyo's daughter or something like that?
I have no idea what was going
I'm
on.
almost
Something
positive he
happened. I
was, as a
think
matter
there
of
was like
fact.
something dust up between the two.
I'm almost positive that he was,
Oh damn.
at least at one time.
That's just a recipe for disaster. But
Like,
I will say this.
Hopefully I'm not just spreading some stupid ass rumor, but I'm pretty sure. Anyway,
I will say this. The one time I met Mayorga was the first press conference I ever attended. And that's when I was fresh out of college and doing a gig with Showtime. And that was for the Vargas fight. Now, it wasn't the one where Vargas punched him in the face and the whole melee broke out. So at this press conference, if you remember it, they had a divider between them, like a whole.
yeah, dude, that was like a perfect storm for, like, you know, Fernando Vargas was the kind of guy where like he could be kind of nice and cool on the promotion, but if it was anybody who was talking shit, like it was over, bro.
Totally. And so they have the glass divider, but that really didn't like stop anything, because immediately when Vargas gets on stage, he's already standing there. Mayorga appears. Don King is going off. Like, again, it's my first press conference. I'm in awe right now because this is a crazy spectacle. Everybody is already high tension. Security guards are on notice. King is going wild. Vargas is fuming and sweating. And it's the summertime, by the way. So then Mayorga shows up, and Mayorga, like Muhammad Ali would back in the day or something, immediately starts talking shit as he walks to the ballroom, pointing at all kinds of other people, going all kinds of wildness. Vargas, within 2 seconds, jumps off the stage and starts charging at him because he's pissed off. So they're not even at the dividers, they're not even on stage yet. Vargas jumps off, starts charging at him. Mayorga is over there running his mouth back. Like, security guard literally picked me up because I'm a small person and moved and just like handed me out of the way like a child and ran over there to break them up. I had a growth spurt for like 2 seconds. You know what I mean? It was wild. They didn't come to blows again. They came close. But I'll say this: after it calmed down a little bit and things got underhand, Mayorga came by us and like he just walked up, gave me dap, and gave the other person I was with dap, just for the hell of it. Unprovoked, anything. Just came over, just kind of like shook our hands and smiled and kept it pushing.
Weren't they like pushing the plexiglass like at each other or some shit?
Yeah, totally. They're going and spitting at each other. Yeah, man. It looked like they were talking through a jail call or something like that. They were just kind of headbutting and yelling. It was ridiculous. And then Vargas ended up losing it, of all things. He was the next one that was supposed to take Mayorga and use him as like his comeback fight, like De La Hoya did, like Tito did, and he blew it.
Dude, he had so much talent, And I know a lot of people would say like, oh, you know, Tito ruined him and whatever, fine. But I think that a lot of it was just that he used to blow up in weight. He would get out of shape. And then he did not live a very healthy lifestyle for a long time, I think, dude. And I think that's a lot of it, man. Honestly, like I could relate, but fuck, dude, I'm not a fighter. But either way, for that matter, Fernando Vargas did some pretty decent shit talking himself. I guess if you would call spitting on Ross Thompson after fucking knocking him down shit talk.
Yeah, seriously, that was really. I mean, like I know him and Thompson were going back and forth before that fight. Like
Yeah.
you see in the press conference, and they were, Thompson was jaw jacking a lot. Like he was really confident. I don't know if there was what happened beforehand or some training, whatever it was. But Thompson was very confident before that fight, pissed off Vargas. Like you said, it didn't take much for Fernando Vargas to get angry. He had a very short fuse. So yeah, Thompson gets dropped. Vargas jumps right in front of him, like something Tony Ayala Sr. would have done. Not Tony Ayala Jr., excuse me. Tony Ayala Jr., I think, actually did to one of his past opponents, and something like Duran would have done.
And what did he say to fucking Oscar De La Hoya? We got the ferocious squad over here. We got the Peter Pan squad over there. I'm in the best shape of my life. And he kept like talking like Michael Jackson, like he was Oscar.
And then he kept on flexing and flexing. You find out he was roided to the gym.
Then find out he tested positive and got TKO'd. Oh, brutal. He never
for
lived
something
that
he
down.
claimed that probably didn't happen as a
all
kid.
all because he slipped on the ice. Yeah. All because he fucking slipped on the ice.
He fell into a ditch or whatever, and he's mad that was tough to pick him up. I would have done the same thing. Would have kept on running.
I would have been like, what? Who are you? Some bum is on the fucking ice. Yeah,
didn't even think twice about it.
He fell on the fucking ice, and he's
forgot about less than 10 minutes later. And Vargas,
dude, think just sum that up. He fell and then got mad at Oscar, so mad that he wanted to fight him, fought him, and got his ass kicked and tested positive. That's like 4 L's, dude. That's like you fell, he didn't help you. You wanted to he kicked your ass, and you test. That's like 5 L's. Fuck. Brutal. That's brutal. All right. Well, let me go ahead and move on to another one before we get too caught up in the Vargas Mayorga talk. Actually, dude, well, no, I'll save that for a moment. I'll go straight to, well, you brought him up, Roberto Durán.
Totally.
Roberto Durán is the crazy thing is that he wasn't always a trash talker. It was just that there were certain fighters he really didn't like. Well, one in particular, but there were certain fighters that he really did not like. And if he didn't like them, that he mistreated them. Like, I mean, he did not treat them well, either in the ring or out. And in this particular instance, I mean, obviously the one we're going to point to so readily for him is going to be Ray Leonard. Kind of threw some shade at Ray Leonard's wife, needless to say, talked a lot of shit.
Yeah. So flipped off Leonard's wife, talked a bunch of shit, like you said, before the fight, did everything. Leonard, at that point, the consummate professional, the guy that, so much in the media that he was in, right? And just always being the face and always that, like he was like cool. Like he always just had a smile and no one really got the best of him. He had a vicious streak as he saw in the ring, but
to the point where it was almost like contrived, like people were like, oh, is he people still say like, is he rehearsed type of shit? And
something Oscar kind of dealt with in the 90s too, to a degree. Yep. But you knew there was like a meanness under it. You were just waiting for someone to like really push his buttons enough for it to come out. And Duran did that, but Duran did that brilliantly. Because he got Leonard so mad that, he ended up fighting Duran's fight. And Duran really did that on purpose. It wasn't so much for the fact that like he hated Leonard. I'm sure he, he definitely see and thought that Leonard was getting a lot of accolades that he didn't deserve because of being an Olympian and all the publicity he was getting and all this yada, yada, yada. But like, he also believed to himself too that he knew he could beat Leonard. And he knew if he could piss him off enough that like really get under his skin, which he was a master at, then he'd be able to get Leonard to, want to do the macho thing and fight him man to man. Perfect.
And he did. And it was actually part of the history, in my opinion, remembers that fight just like a little bit wrong. Not wrong, but just like a little off. Because I think the narrative is kind of like, oh, Duran sucked him into his fight and kicked his ass. And it's like, it was a really close fight, actually, dude. Very close. And so it wasn't, and Duran obviously prevailed and I think clearly deserved the decision and did suck Ray Leonard into that kind of fight and won doing that.
Mhm.
But it wasn't like Ray Leonard didn't win rounds, is all I'm saying.
Oh
So
no, and
it was a very close fight.
It was a very close fight, and that's why a lot of people consider it maybe the single greatest win in boxing history. Well, it's certainly up there. And
For the timing of everything, yeah, it was.
Timing of everything, Sugar Ray
big.
Leonard at his absolute peak, the way he did it. I mean, both guys at their best, and Duran on his terms. Just it wasn't like an all-out brawl, man. It was a brilliantly fought fight, and Leonard, to his credit, really came on strong at the end too, man. It was really, really, really close, but Duran clearly won the fight, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
Leonard admitted it as such, but even after the fight, bro, right? Like the way Duran just dismissed Leonard, just like, get away from me. Leonard tried to finally, embrace him, whatever, Duran off like that, and still shit talking him. Like there was, a certain
and then walked over to the ropes and started grabbing his dick.
Yeah, just
damn.
That was Duran. He had no problem doing anything like that.
Well, and it's the way that he stopped trash talking as much after that first fight too. And I remember reading like what they had said at one of the press conferences for their rematch, and Duran got all annoyed because somebody, like, basically people kept asking, like referring to him as a street brawler, or a street fighter. And he was just like, stop, like, can you guys stop with this bullshit? Because I'm not a street fighter. I didn't grow up a street fighter or anything like that. I learned how to fight in the gym. Like, I'm a boxer, and stop calling me a street fighter, because I'm not just some street fighter, because he took
was brilliant.
Yeah, he took it as like that was like a bad thing. Like, that it wasn't, because when we hear that, often we associate that with like, oh, they came up the hard way and they're all fucking badass. And I think that he heard that and he thought like somebody was saying he was unskilled or didn't know what the fuck he was doing. And he was like, no, like, I'm schooled, bro. Like, don't fucking, I got that degree. Get the fuck out of here. So I think that was one of the things he was saying for the rematch. And it's funny because Ray Leonard flipped the script on his ass.
Totally.
And just started razzing his ass, just fucking zinging him. And fucking Roberto Durán got pissed. And that was part of it too. I think that he was too much messing around, had too much difficulty making weight.
Well, that
it was a lot of things.
As well, making sure that he got an immediate rematch and making sure that it took place, only a few months after this. Like 5 months.
And Leonard admits to it even now. He's just like, oh yeah, totally. Of course I pressed my fucking, advantage.
Mm-hmm. And there's no way, like, for a big fight rematch, there's never in today's age where a fight would take place 5-6 months after the first one like that, like quick turnaround. And
not a fight of that magnitude.
Not a fight of that magnitude, not at all. And like you said, Duran was out partying immediately after that. That was the biggest fight he ever won. This was the biggest win in Panama history, everything. Like, this was one of the biggest wins in boxing history. Duran was the man right now, pound for pound, number one in the sport, just, that dude. But Duran was also a person that was, of gluttony. He liked to go out, he liked to party, he liked to eat, he liked to indulge, and he certainly did all of that immediately afterwards. He had his share of women, he had his share of food, he had his share of drink. He never touched drugs or anything like that. That's why he was able to last so long. But I mean, he was a partier, and he was out raging and doing his thing. And like you said, man, he was not in shape when he got back for this fight, and so quickly to sign back on. And it took him a lot to get all that weight off, and he wasn't really at his peak. Even still, in the fight, it was still relatively close. Duran was still doing good work going on. Yeah, man.
Yeah, it was really very close.
It wasn't until Leonard started really pulling some nonsense in the last few rounds, pulling some tricks out, that Duran was just like, the hell? And it was the last one. This was the sequence that you knew Duran was done with, when Leonard went bop, and then hit him with the jab immediately afterwards. And
did the old kind of helicopter fucking like hit him with the jab.
He like spun his hand around. I mean, that became synonymous with Leonard, that it ended up being in Knockout Kings video games and everything like that. That was like a specialty punch. And he did that to Duran. Duran was so disgusted because that's not him. He's macho and all this other stuff, and he's made to look a fool. Plus, he's probably not feeling good too. Like you said, he's just not in the best of shape, and he's just kind of like, fuck it. But immediately, if you notice, like seconds after he says no mas and quits, I don't think he realized what he did. It was like the heat of the moment, because right after he did that, and I think he started realizing what just happened, you see him try to like stop and be like, no, 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 I want to go again. Like he tries to move in, and the referee's like, that's it. And yeah.
Yeah, dude. He got him, and he outfought him too. It, like you said, both fights were super close. It wasn't like Ray Leonard kicked his ass in the rematch either. It was just that whatever it was. I mean, I guess
Leonard was ahead. You can look at the scores right here, and Leonard was ahead by 2 points on two of the cards and 1 point on the other card.
So, yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, it was a very close fight. But whatever it was, Duran wasn't having it. He couldn't have it. So, I mean, I guess that's always the danger, turnabout's fair play. You're going to talk shit, then I guess you better back it up. And he wound up getting his jaw jacked a little bit in that rematch. But nonetheless, I know that he was saying he was definitely saying something to Davey Moore ahead of time, but I can't remember what it was. But of course, there's also the famous post fight after he just totally fucking annihilated Ray Lampkin. Yeah, today I sent him to the hospital. Next time I sent him to the morgue.
My dad used to always bring that up to me when I was like first learning about the sport, because he watched that live, I guess. And he never forgot that. He was like, oh, I remember the time Duran said he was going to send a guy said he was going to kill a guy next time. And I was like, whoa, he said that?
Like he said it a little differently. He said something to the effect of like, oh, like I wasn't even trying. If I would have tried, I would have sent next time. I would have something like that.
Yeah.
Something like that. And it just wound up getting translated a little differently and passed around in English a different way. But regardless, it was grim shit, dude.
It was very grim shit. And that was quoted years later. There was the mid 90s. I want to say like 95 or not. No, it wasn't 95, around like 96 or so. And they did a thing where they did an article where Duran was given a bunch of photos of like different fights and stuff. And he had to talk about it, like being reminiscent. Like there was a photo of him in his leather jacket when he was young, first on the scene in New York. And he talked about, how he felt about that and, being a young kid in the big city and all this other yada, yada, yada. So then they showed the clip, the photo of him over Ray Lampkin. Like you said, Duran in Panama standing over him with the beer, just menacing, and Lampkin just splayed out unconscious. And Duran was quoted, I'm not completely quoting him correctly here, but he said something to the effect of, people say I was going to kill him, and maybe that seems kind of grim, but like it is in fact true. Probably if I was in good shape, I probably would have killed him. Like he still didn't really change his opinion all those years later. He was just kind of matter of fact about it. He was just like, yeah, well, it is what it is.
Well, he caught him with the left hook that almost took his head off.
Yeah.
I mean, it's brutal shit. And Lampkin was a good fighter. It wasn't like he was some scrub.
No, man, Lampkin was a very, very good fighter. He was stuck in one of those divisions that was like stacked. He couldn't get past.
Yeah, came along at the wrong time.
Esteban de Jesus. Both guys had his number. Yeah, man. But if he came at a different era, totally would have been a champion.
Yeah, very underrated in the long run, Esteban de Jesus too. So I mean, it's like, it came up in an era with two really, really, really good lightweights, had the awful fortune of walking into that one.
Well, to mention this, so you mentioned Duran. One of Duran's, the only guy to go the distance twice with Duran at lightweight was a guy by the name of Edwin Viruet. And Edwin Viruet was another one who was a major trash talker. In fact, he was the only guy back then to trash talk a prime Duran while still going the distance with him and giving him fits.
Both the Viruet brothers actually did not they did not like Duran, and Duran apparently did not like them. Nope. What it stemmed from, I have absolutely no idea, but I'm almost positive they're Puerto Rican.
Yes.
And I mean, I'm not saying that has anything to do with it. Like, oh, everybody knows Puerto Ricans hate Panamanians. Like, I have no fucking clue. I'm just saying that, like, that might have had something to do with it, but I have no idea. But I do remember reading that they were fairly, trash talky when it came to their fights.
Yeah, especially Edwin Viruet. Like he just even to
He had a tough style too.
He did. Oh no, these guys were tough as hell, man. Viruet was a beast. He wasn't knocked out until the very end of his career. One of them against Edwin Rosario, which no shame in that. A prime Rosario coming on the scene was knocking the hell out of everybody. And he was also knocked out by another guy who was very flamboyant and funny, Alvin Too Sweet Hayes. um, if you're from the Michigan, Detroit area, that's a name you might remember from the 80s. Anyways, that was at the very end of his career. When Viruet was a lightweight contender during the heyday of Duran, no one was knocking him out. All right. And it was another guy that fought a who's who. Like you said, he had a very herky-jerky style, hard to gauge, tough boxer, threw a lot of punches. Maybe slightly in the mold of a guy like Manuel Medina. But whatever, regardless of how it was, he gave Duran fits. And the first time they fought was a non-title fight. Duran clearly won, but Viruet went the distance and gave Duran a very good account of himself. And Duran clearly didn't like him, so they had a rematch. And when they had the rematch, same thing. Viruet was talking a lot of shit throughout the fight, went the distance, clearly lost, but same thing. And Viruet was interviewed. There's interviews out there on YouTube on him where you hear him still. I think he's a trainer in the Bronx. I'm not sure if he's still active or not, but at his gym, he was talking about the Duran fights. He still feels the same way. Like he's proud of going the distance. You can say he's really proud of his accomplishments, but he was like, oh yeah, man, I made Duran look like shit. He was like, I'll box the boxer. I did that. They know I won those fights still. Absolutely. And there's like one photo of him that he has like framed that he loves. It's like, that's him spearing Duran with a jab and Duran's head snapping back. He was like, yeah, it's the second fight for the title. I mean, it's cool. Like I would love to meet a guy like Edwin Viruet. If he's still active, I might go, I would love to visit his gym and talk with him for a bit because I'm sure he has some fascinating stories. But yeah. You know what? To be honest though, if I went the distance twice with a prime Duran, I'd be still talking about
That's
that.
That's what I'm saying. Too. If there were photos of me legitimately hitting Roberto Durán with a punch, I'd have that shit framed myself. Are you kidding me?
Absolutely.
Jesus.
I made copies of it and signed it to everybody in the neighborhood.
Yep. And I just give it out. That shit would become the currency around my neighborhood. Seriously.
Walking to a bar, just giving out photos. You know who I am? Boop, 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 boop.
Yeah, just start making it rain, tipping with the photos. Yeah, straight up, dude. That's a pretty damn good description of his style too. Herky jerky, really difficult to deal with. And I mean, especially with a guy like Duran at lightweight, who that's considered his prime weight, and he looked great and everything. That was one of the only fighters that was giving him fits at that weight because he was.
And still running your mouth about it too.
Got to be frustrating.
For a guy like Duran who's very proud and likes to knock the shit out of everybody that he fights, yeah, I'm sure he was totally frustrated with him. Who's
another trash talker?
Well, we were talking about him recently, like a week ago. I think we were messaging just because of like how unfathomable, but awesome it was that he was trash talking during this fight. But we got to bring up Jack Johnson, one of the OGs.
Yep. Dude, when you add in how legitimately dangerous it was for him to be talking shit, because we're talking about an era where fights would get stopped by the cops if they were just getting a little bit too out of hand, like too brutal, like somebody's getting their ass kicked a little too bad. The cops are just like, all right, enough of that, y'all. Somebody's getting punched. So we're talking about, and we're talking about a black dude punching white guys.
Yes.
And talking shit while he's doing it. Just that takes some balls, dude. I know that the tale of Jack Johnson has kind of been bastardized a bit to make him probably a little too heroic. But totally. Even so, just the balls that takes. Massive.
Dude, he was, you're talking turn of the century America. It's still very, very entrenched in racism. And the black fighters that are around at that point, they're not really accepted in America, but at the same time, they're not overly hated either because they're not guys like Sam Langford, Joe Jeanette, Jack Blackburn, Sam McVeigh, the list goes on and on of different fighters from that time. Like they more or less they didn't do anything to really put themselves in the social sphere like that. Like they just kind of kept to themselves and made sure they didn't cause too much of a ruckus. Jack Johnson wasn't anything like that.
Well, and there was, and sorry to interrupt, but there was actually there were writers, mostly white writers, of course, who specifically talked about this. Like, I mean, in very descriptive terms, essentially saying that fighters like Joe Gans, Joe Walcott, but to a lesser extent, because Joe Walcott also got into some shit sometimes.
Yeah,
but,
he did.
But like Joe Jeanette was, well, that would have been a little teeny bit later, but yeah, like Joe Gans was probably the first. Peter Jackson, sorry, that was who I was trying to think of. Peter Jackson and Joe Gans were the first two fighters.
George Dixon too, maybe.
Yeah, to a lesser extent, just because he wasn't as famous at the time.
Yeah.
But like that's who these white writers would point to as black fighters or black men, how black men should behave, because they're quiet and they're not talking shit and they're respectful and they're always saying yes sir or no ma'am or whatever, and basically getting out of their way type of thing. That's how they wanted them to behave. I mean, that's like, we don't really need to break this down. We all understand why at this point. But that being said, Jack Johnson then comes along, and Jack Johnson clearly didn't really have much interest in conforming to a lot of that kinds of behavior. And so then, like, you and I have passed along like just articles and stuff like that we find, and every so often, probably more than every so often, when I actually look for articles about these fighters, there are cartoons and depictions that are just fucking awful, but they're specifically fucking awful when they're depicting the fighters who, according to white society, aren't well behaved. Like Joe Gans ain't getting drawn like that nearly as much.
Absolutely.
Peter Jackson, not nearly as much either. These were well-dressed gentlemen. Whereas, I mean, Jack Johnson was well-dressed, but it was gaudy. It was over the top. It was flashy. And he was, like, he had a golden smile and he was always smiling. And people were like, I don't like that golden smile. It's like,
then they make him extra dark and everything with the smile.
Yeah, like it was
weird and like
man, awful. And Sam Langford was another one.
Like I'm getting visuals thinking about him again, like with the cards that they came and other stuff.
It's awful.
Yeah,
it's terrible. Sam Langford was another one who they depicted as like an animal half the time. Mm-hmm. So anyway, not to beat
a lot of those guys, like jazz musicians, later on in the 40s and such, they got more respect and admiration in Europe.
100%. Yeah. And I mean, it's not that the racism, it's not like there was no racism. There was definitely an element of gawking racism and, curiosity, but curiosity stemming from racism a lot of the time. But even so, they were at least able to be treated not like fucking animals and get paid. Totally. And not be prohibited from, doing X, Y, or Z a lot of the time. There were still rules as far as who they could fight and couldn't fight and whatnot. But anyway.
And according to a lot of writers of that time, I guess they had to pick a litter of who they wanted to bag, if they want, who they wanted to bed to with the women.
Well, yeah, that was definitely less frowned upon, specifically in Paris and in France, where a lot of black fighters in the early 1900s were super popular. And as a heavyweight champion, so, I mean, getting back to the whole trash talk thing, and not to beat the dead horse about the racism talk, regardless of the fact that it is a massive part of the narrative and shouldn't be forgotten, getting back to the trash talk part, even in the course of winning the heavyweight title against Tommy Burns, like, oh, is that what you got, Mr. Tommy? Is that what you got, Mr. Tommy? Just trying
Burns
to basically
coming back with the stupidest of insults, with like through shredded, bloodied lips, and
yeah, like it was just absolutely terrible.
Come on and fight.
Yeah, telling him to stand and fight, stand and fight with him, fight with me, shit like that. And no, why would he? No, he's tooling you around and totally whip the shit out of you. So that's what he did. And then basically the entire way, one of the criticisms, obviously, of Jack Johnson as a heavyweight champion was that he never defended the title against one of his black contemporary fighters, who, a handful of them definitely deserved title shots without a question. But even so, during these title defenses against these white fighters, that's pretty much all he was doing the entire time, was talking shit, including especially against James Jeffries, who everyone coaxed out of retirement because they wanted so badly a white guy to be champion again, because they just could not handle this black dude being champion. So they got the fattest, they got the fattest motherfucker on the face of the planet to go fucking fight him. Yeah. Oh.
Jeffrey's just minding his business, sitting on his farm. You know what I mean? Chilling, like you said, just getting really fat, whatever. And then they coax him out of retirement, finally decides to do it. And I think what's the best part of that whole fight is not besides Jeffries getting his ass kicked and, you know, kind of Johnson shoving it to white America, but the fact that all the shit he was talking to Jim Corbett is pretty awesome. All right. Now, you know, everybody, gentleman Jim Corbett obviously was not much of a gentleman, especially if you know your history. Like, the guy was a seething racist and just not a good person. You know, despite what he was portrayed as being a classy gentleman, always dressed to the nines, and Mr. Scientist, you know, the father of scientific boxing of the modern stuff, and yada, yada, yada. Like, he just was not a good person at all. And he was like the head of the helm, basically calling for Johnson's head and demanding that Jeffries come out of retirement and do something for this, because we can't have this ghastly man as the heavyweight champion. And so if you, like, you know, even more so than John L. Sullivan, like, if you go through that time, Sullivan, a noted racist himself, was a little bit more low key than even Corbett was. Corbett was much more out there, how much he seethingly hated Johnson. So regardless, you had this fight, you know, during the fight, and obviously Johnson quickly proves that he's, like, you know, Jeffrey's master, and he's toying with him and doing what he's done, basically what he did to Tommy Burns, slapping him around. But while he's doing it, he is like, after like the third or fourth round, it starts where Jim Corbett starts chiming in, just give him a little something, Jeff. Go ahead, hit him in the body, blah, 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 blah. And that's when Johnson starts going back and smiling at him. Oh yeah, like this, boom, boom, boom. How you like that, Mr. You know, how you like that, Mr. Jim? You see Corbett on inaudible, you know, like
grumbling like a bastard,
grumbling and racist yelling and all that other stuff. A few rounds later, I think he's getting tired, Jim. I think he wants to fight a little bit. Get in on him. Oh yeah, totally. Like this, Mr. Corbett. Looks at him and smiles again.
Yeah, probably
boiling.
Grabbing his weird straw hat.
Pulling it down, getting all pissed off. Finally, when the fight's done, you gotta do something. Just get in there and fight him. Oh, like this. Probably Jeffries is looking at, man, shut the fuck up, all right? You get my ass
you're making my ass kicked worse, bro. Stop it.
Stop it. You know, you're just pissing him off. Stop doing this.
That photo of Johnson standing over Jeffries, who's tumbled into the ropes and, you know, has finally kind of like taken a knee.
Iconic photo.
Yeah, dude, that shit is just like, and you see the audience just looking like, fuck.
And there was a photo in that the Nat Fleischer historical boxing book that everybody has, that Corbett is seething immediately after the fight. You see them, the hat, the whole thing, dude. His face looks like the Emperor from Star Wars. It's just in a massive, just different like grimace and wrinkles, because he is
getting
so angry.
Pinker by the moment.
Just livid, absolutely livid by what he just saw. You know what I mean? Everything he had banked on, all that just crashed down in front of him. But here's the thing too, man, about this trash talking. History would kind of like, you know, how Corbett was like the older guy trying to needle Johnson and piss him off and try to be that thorn on the side. We talked about this before. A couple of decades later, Jack Johnson ended up being that for Joe Louis. And still with his shit talking, you know?
That's true. Well, and actually to the point where, I mean, I didn't even expect to bring this up, but to the point where, according to some reports, a crowd almost, think about this. Just, I mean, you're Jack Johnson. You are an icon, a hero to the Black community. You're the first Black heavyweight champion. And you talk so much shit that a crowd almost turns on you and gets you, a Black crowd in Harlem, because you trash talk Joe Louis.
After this first Schmeling fight, ran up there with his winnings because he bet on Schmeling. and started running his mouth about how he was right now smelling knocked out Joe Louis in Harlem.
So brutal.
Immediately after the fight. No one said he was the smartest guy on the planet.
No.
All right.
So brutal, dude.
And that was all because he couldn't get Jack. Well, because he was throwing kind of a hissy fit because Jack Blackburn was Lewis's trainer and not him. And he didn't like Jack Blackburn.
And so supposedly, according to Jack Blackburn, because I mean, this is only one side of the story, but at the time, Jack Blackburn said in interviews, because it was like a slight controversy, because it was like, oh, the former heavyweight champion and the only black heavyweight champion doesn't support this fighter who everybody expects to be the future heavyweight champion. What the fuck is up with that? Well, and so Jack Blackburn during that time gave some interviews, and in the interviews he said that he had sparred Jack Johnson way back in the day, because he was a fighter, Jack Blackburn,
very, very good one himself.
And he was way smaller than Jack Johnson, although Jack Johnson grew obviously and had been fighting for a long time, but that he had sparred Jack Johnson and that he didn't beat him, but that he had gotten some punches on him, and that Jack Johnson didn't like it, and that because he felt Jack Johnson, according to him, felt that Jack Blackburn was trying to show him up, make him look bad. And so there was a falling out between them because they were like training partners and gym mates and stuff like that. And so Jack Blackburn hated Jack Johnson for this, and basically, according to popular lore, I don't know exactly how you could confirm it or not, because he didn't really say, but according to popular lore, the 7 laws or whatever that Joe Louis was made to follow by his management was inspired by the way Jack Johnson acted, and not so much the way he acted, but the way that white America reacted to the way that Jack Johnson was acting. So, for instance, you couldn't gloat over a fallen opponent. You couldn't be seen, with any. You couldn't have your picture taken with any white women. You couldn't go into a restaurant with any white women. There was this whole set of fucking rules that he had to follow. And in any case, Jack Johnson's behavior, according to them, inspired that.
Oh yeah,
But yeah, so there was a whole backstory between Jack Blackburn and Jack Johnson, but Jack Johnson had been talking shit for a while.
And it's true. And what's interesting is that Johnson initially was in support of Louis. Like when Louis first came on the scene, Johnson backed him and said that he had the stuff to overtake and become future heavyweight champion. But it was it took a little bit of time, but after, Johnson slowly started meeting with, oh, Louis looks really good, but he still needs a few adjustments here and there. No, Louis has the stuff. Yeah, Louis has the stuff, but he just needs to work on something. Actually, you know what? If Louis really wants to take his game to the next level, he should make me as his trainer. And what initially turned Johnson,
the old Oscar De La Hoya, I have the blueprint.
Yeah, yep. And when initially I think turned Johnson off was that he visited, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he visited Lewis's manager, Julian Black. And that's his name, right? And
yeah, he had a few, and yeah.
So he went to visit
Roxborough
him.
was another one.
Yeah, and in Roxborough too. It was either one of Julian Black or John Roxborough, both of them. But he went to visit them, and they were the same camp as Jack Blackburn, where they didn't like Jack Johnson. And when Johnson went to go plead his case to be like, hey man, take Blackburn out, I want to be Lewis's trainer, they kicked him out. And quite vocally, they're like, fuck out of here. We want nothing to do with you. Like nothing. And Johnson, feeling very insulted that he was rebunked like that, rebuffed, was like, okay, you know what, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And that's when he started yada, 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 boom, 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 boom. And then he never really stopped. And when he died in that car accident, I think he was on his way to Joe Lewis's fight rematch with Billy Conn, wasn't he?
Yep. Or at least that's what they say. Yeah.
Yeah.
That he was with whoever was the person who accompanied him at the time, that he had a person who looked after him or whatever, or would just go with him on road trips. Cause he was obsessed with driving. He fucking loved to drive, and he loved to drive fast. So he was always getting the fastest cars available, and then just fucking going, from this city to another in his fast cars. And yeah, that's how he died. Wound up running into some other car or something like that and dying pretty much instantly.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, definitely one of the top tier trash talkers. Absolutely no question, especially given the circumstances, like I said. So another one, since, well, we'll just keep it flowing since you brought him up, but since you talked about him, but Bob Fitzsimmons specifically toward gentleman Jim Corbett, he didn't like him. So Bob Fitzsimmons had some. This is not a long
Makes
entry.
me even more of a Fitzsimmons fan.
I know. This is not a long entry, but he had some at the time what would have been considered absolute fucking awesome trash talk toward James Corbett. So basically,
such old timey talk too. I know it.
Yeah, dude, and it's basically stuff that would have been like, oh, that's barely printable, at the time. But just to kind of set this up a little bit, during the 1890s, right? Like the popular narrative or history of it is that John L. Sullivan was the kind of transition fighter between the bare knuckle era and the gloved era. There's kind of conflicting reports as far as what John L. Sullivan preferred, whether he preferred gloves or he preferred to fight bare knuckle. But looking back, I think it's pretty clear he liked to fight with the gloves because he had more glove fights than not. And so, point being, when he was defeated by James Corbett was kind of like considered, all right, well, this is the first gloved era heavyweight champion. So in any case, not too long after that, Bob Fitzsimmons enters the picture, and he was dude, that fool was going bald ever since he was like 10 years old. So it's tough to know even how old he was. No, but like he enters the picture, and when he takes over as the heavyweight champion, defeats Jim Corbett, for whatever reason, Jim Corbett was still lingering about and trying to claim the heavyweight championship. And so for whatever reason, there was some group of kind of writers and pundits who were like buying into it at the time. And there was some confusion, even though there really was no confusion, but they were trying to bill James Corbett still as the heavyweight champion. Yeah. And so Bob Fitzsimmons was not having that shit. He didn't like that shit whatsoever. And he went to the papers and he called James Corbett, and I quote, a cur.
I've heard that.
So which a cur, of course, is like a mangy dog, or slang for like a dog or whatever. What else?
That's what Joe Kowinski called Fitzsimmons.
Yep. Yeah. Like that was, I guess that's just like the pinnacle of like, that's like motherfucker or something like that. And like Canelo's gonna, oh, you fuck the motherfuck you.
Yeah.
It's not gonna have that shit. Oh, damn it. I just lost it. I had it over here. I had like a little quote. Oh yeah, there he goes. He said, if I do meet him again, I guarantee to kill him stone dead before he leaves the ring. Yeah, dude, basically Fitzsimmons was just like, man, they weren't having that shit. And apparently they also got into a handful of like shoving matches and trash talk battles in bars and stuff like that. And Bob Fitzsimmons was apparently just, god tier fucking trash talker when it came to shit, throwing shit off the cuff, which is hilarious.
Sorry, in a street fight, I would pick Fitzsimmons all day. He would have absolutely throttled Corbett.
It's hilarious because even now, especially now, I guess, however many years later, more than a century later, I post a photo of Bob Fitzsimmons and he looks like the most gangly, unassuming, like uncle or something like that you would just not. You'd see him in a dive bar and you'd be like, this guy's not shit, dude. Like, I'm gonna take this guy's girl right now. And then the next thing you know, his lanky freckled ass is laying you out over the fucking bar and then just stealing the bottle of whiskey. Nobody's
and then you turn around and you see his back and you realize his shoulders and his whole wide is built like a heavyweight, and you're like, oh okay. The dude was a blacksmith, man. He came from like he was a beast. All right,
he apprenticed as a blacksmith when he was like a teenager. So I mean, like, he looked funky, yeah, but then if you actually got past the freckles, dude, he was built.
And trust me, man, as a blacksmith, I'm sure he got quite a few dust ups in his time over there. Because what else were they doing in their pastimes?
Yeah, for sure. Well, and it was clear, he could fight. Everybody knew he could fight.
Oh yeah, man,
he could trash talk too.
Totally. But to keep in line with these heavyweights, another dude, I wouldn't say he was so much of a trash talker, but when he wanted to get insulting, he was really vicious with it. But that was Larry Holmes.
That's a good one. That's true, because it's like he didn't always trash talk, but if you pissed him off,
Yeah,
he
if he
was
didn't
really
like
gonna
you,
go off.
man, yeah, if he didn't like you, he would really say what was on his mind. And I'll give you a couple of examples. I can't for first one. A lot of people might not know this. He had a vendetta against light heavyweight champion at the time, Eddie Mustafa Muhammad. I'm not going to repeat exactly what was quoted in the Ring magazine for this article because it's a lot of it is actually very vulgar. But and back then, Ring magazine came. Well, magazines in general were a lot more loose in what they were able to print.
Yeah.
So I'll just leave it at that. But one thing he did say, among other things, about how he felt about Eddie Mustafa Muhammad was because this was around. Remember now to take this into context, this was around 1980. It's 1979, 1980. So this was around like the Iran hostage situation. Larry Holmes says that they should have taken those. He said that they should have taken Eddie Mustafa Muhammad and sent him to Iran and given us the hostages back because no one cares about Eddie and people actually miss the hostages. Like,
Jesus, dude. God damn.
and seriously, and that's what I said. Among other things, like I said, I'm not going to repeat what he said. Another like that. Go back and find the magazine because it's all in there. But not only was Larry Holmes kind of can be really vicious with his trash talking, but I mean he was a bitter guy, man. He felt a lot of injustices in his career. He was obviously in Ali's shadow. He wanted to respect as a heavyweight champion, but he never really felt he was getting it. Ali was still really much in the limelight early on in his title reign before they eventually fought, which Holmes was pissed off about because every time Holmes had a fight in Vegas, Ali was there for another function, and Ali always took the spotlight. And so, who wants to see Larry Holmes against Ozzy Ocasio? Who wants to see Larry Holmes against Alfredo Evangelista? Who wants to see Larry Holmes against Lorenzo Zanon? These were just middling contenders at the time. Ali's going to be in town pulling a magic trick act or appearing in some play or doing something else or whatever. Everyone's going to go gravitate to that. Holmes is pissed off. I'm the champion. Blah blah blah. Finally, things boil over when Ali loses. When Holmes beats Scott Ledoux and Ali made an appearance over there and just went absolutely wild, and it became a crazy scene. So they fight after that, and Holmes now is even more disliked now because look, he just beat the heavyweight. He beat Ali. You beat the hero. Everyone's
it's the double-edged sword. It's like it's the passing of the torch, but then like they fucking hate you because you did them in like Marciano and Lewis,
Absolutely, but like Marciano was still like a humble guy that was easy to like. Holmes was still kind of bitter and complaining about a lot of injustices happening and kind of demanding for him to get attention. So it was like he never really was going to get that. And then after he beats Ali, who's on the scene now, Jerry Cooney. Now Holmes has a legitimate gripe because Cooney is being pushed because he's a white heavyweight who's knocking the shit out of everybody. So Holmes, who still really isn't popular, and has to contend with that. Now he is running his mouth a lot. What he's going to do to Cooney? I'm going to do this. I'm going to knock him out. Holmes was very vocal before that fight, rightfully so, because the way things were going on. But like he was the one that was like really like trying to push and do things. And a couple of times he tried to attack Cooney. There was that melee after the Leon Spinks fight where Harold Cosell suffered a bloody lip because Holmes went after him and they almost brawled. And a couple other times, like Holmes was a feisty dude. So fast forward though, through after all, him being bitter. Now during his second career, Holmes wasn't, he did trash talk a little bit, but it was more having fun in the ring. I'll give you a perfect example. In the Evander Holyfield fight, he arguably had a better fight than George Foreman did. Like Foreman had his moments, and that was a fun one. But Holmes legitimately gave Holyfield fits, especially early on, because Holmes was just really experienced. And so I think it was round 2 or so. Holmes, as he liked to do, he lay in the corner and just kind of let you come at him. He would counter you off the corner with uppercuts and other things like that. And he was still really good at doing that. That's how he beat Ray Mercer and a few others. Like Holmes was brilliant. And Holyfield fell for the trap, and Holmes was catching him. Pop, 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 right? Lou Duver and George Benching are going wild ringside because they're like, freaking out because they know Holmes is in the zone now and Holyfield's falling for it. And this is going to be a difficult night. Immediately after the round, Lou Duver gets on the apron all pissed off and he's yelling at Holmes because Holmes is just sitting there relaxing. And then Holmes looks at him and goes like this and taps him on his head like a little kid patting it, like he patted it like a little kid. You remember that part?
Yeah.
He sits there and goes, bop, 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 and Duran starts fuming even more.
Yeah, like he was the biggest hothead on the face of the planet, dude.
Totally.
Lou Duva would start rolling around like through people and shit like that to get at somebody.
And then they sat Holyfield down and were screaming at him, "Do not fall for his traps. What are you doing? Like, you're fighting his fight now. This is what he wants to do." Like, blah, 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 And obviously Holyfield ended up winning, and Larry Holmes ended up puking everywhere immediately after the fight. But still, I thought Holmes would be an interesting one to bring up.
No, he is, dude, because his career spanned such a long time, and he stayed Larry Holmes pretty much the entire time, dude, all the way up to the fucking Butterbean fight, man. The fucking Butterbean fight.
I bet you he still has a jab today if necessary to throw one.
I'm not trying to find out.
Yeah, right.
I'm definitely not trying to find out. But you mentioned, Muhammad Ali, and we can't have the greatest trash talk of all time, without talking about Muhammad Ali. And Larry Holmes used to be a regular sparring partner for Muhammad Ali, and then, as you just mentioned, later defeated Muhammad Ali. But all the way from the early 1960s, before he was even a champion, that was primarily how the Louisville Lip got famous. He was the Louisville Lip, or a number of writers started calling him Gaseous Cassius, because he was always, I guess, spewing gas, I guess they would say, or whatever kind of fucking weird lingo that is from the 1960s. But yeah, there was a handful of other nicknames that they gave Muhammad Ali because he was so loud and always talking so much shit. And yeah,
where did you get that from? Professional wrestling.
Yep, he got it from Gorgeous George. Was primarily, he said, somebody who inspired him to become like a heel and start like playing the crowd in that way, whoever the crowd was, whether it was reporters or an actual crowd. And also on top of that, pro wrestling just in general probably does not get nearly enough credit for the influence that it had over a number of the fighters and like that style overall, because pro wrestling is something that's thought of as like, oh yeah, it's gotten popular in the last few decades, but pro wrestling has been around for a long
very
time.
Popular for a long time,
to the point where the ring used to have a section for pro wrestling in the back that was substantial, like 20 pages, maybe not that long, like 15, but still a substantial pro wrestling section. And so in any event, Muhammad Ali said that he had picked up this kind of heel playing to the crowd stuff from a number of pro wrestlers, specifically Gorgeous George.
Totally. And Ali was one of those guys, man, like you said, bro, he was one of the first fighters out there that started predicting what round he was going to knock guys out in and absolutely doing it. Started dubbing certain fighters with, nicknames before their fight. Floyd Patterson was the Rabbit, Chivalo, the Washerwoman, Sonny Liston, the Big Ugly Bear. But with all the trash talking that he did, people didn't really still take him seriously. I mean, like, he had built up a pretty good, career at that point, credibility wise. Like, but I mean, he had beaten an H and Archie Moore. He went life and death with Doug Jones, which wasn't, not a bad thing, but Jones was a guy he was expected to beat pretty comprehensively. He beat some other fighters up to that point, but no one thought that he would be ready to fight Sonny Liston.
Well, and also, I'm sorry, but you did miss the Henry Cooper fight too.
Absolutely.
That was right. Totally Henry whined Cooper. About for that's still whined about from the British fans, bro. If I post a photo of that fight, dude, they're just like.
I was watching the fascinating documentary, probably my favorite one because it's not really on Ali. It's called Facing Ali.
Yeah, and that is one of the only ones in like semi-recent years that I really enjoyed.
Because it's not really centered on Ali, it's centered on Ali's opponents. And unfortunately, almost all the guys featured on that whole film are dead, with the exception, I think, of Larry Holmes. But Cooper was one of the early guys on it. And, when they talk about that, Cooper talks about how he sets it up, right? And he shows you, he's like, yeah, I fainted. Ali did a thing. When I fainted again, he's like, that's when I come with the left. And that's usually when they go down. I hit Ali and I saw his eyes go up. I knew it. Bop! And that's when Ali exactly went.
And he could really hit.
Cooper? He had a huge left hook.
he absolutely obliterated a dude named Joe Erskine, who was a top level British heavyweight. But like, I mean, on the British scene, Henry Cooper, there was no question that he was like heads and, shoulders the best British heavyweight. It was just that there were other on the world level. In America, there were a number of really, really good fighters that he just couldn't quite get past because his fucking skin
I mean,
could not
or
hold
like
up,
tissue
dude.
paper.
I think that every single loss he had was for cuts. I believe every single loss he had, which is like 11 or something like that.
And they
It's
were
like
ghastly
ridiculous.
cuts too, man. Like they were nasty. Well, not every single loss. I mean, he lost to Joe Bugner by a very controversial decision. I think that was his last fight.
Or I should say every stoppage loss.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally. Like he got gashed up badly. And you've seen the photos, man, just the blood streaming down, like his eyeball
Brutal
looked like
shit,
it was about
yeah.
to fall out. Yeah, man, it was really bad. But like, so if you've never seen that documentary, please gotta. It's pretty awesome. But yeah, from all those different fights. So like when you went up against Liston, man, no one had really seen someone like people thought Ali was crazy because of how much he was shit talking Liston before that fight. You know what I mean? Like no one had ever done that. They were like, he might have been out of his mind, and they took his blood pressure before him. It was like his heart rate was like something absolutely wild. And they were almost about to stop the fight because they were like, yo, this guy's off his rocker. Like, he can't fight. Like, he's crazy. But then everything came down, but he actually spooked Liston. Of all things, Liston was like, didn't really know how to take him. And then Ali put on the performance of a lifetime that no one expected and dominated him. But with all of his talk and everything like that, man, it took a while for America to, really adjust and end up liking him. After the exile, that's when they really accepted him. Before that, they hated him.
Yeah, there was it. Yeah, I think that's a lot of it. The political situation, the social
Yeah.
situation that was going on definitely inspired a large chunk of the American population in particular to support his cause and then therefore become a fan of his.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and then the opposite effect was for the other part of the population who really fucking hated him and, just wanted to see him fail. Go ahead.
America was still pretty conservative in the 60s, even though, like, the revolution,
Mhm.
the flower power, all that stuff was going on, especially when Ali came on the scene around 64. And so for him to like reject the war and then become a part of the Nation of Islam, which was still like, whoa.
Yeah, like Black Panthers, holy shit. Yeah, like
Yeah,
anything
yeah,
that
yeah.
had to do with, black empowerment was like, whoa.
And yeah, America was still like kind of was like conservative and like much more mellow and suburban and all that type of stuff. They weren't ready for any of that. And they're just kind of like, oh my God, is this another Jack Johnson or what's going on here? And people are just kind of like freaked out by the whole thing. And like I said, after the exile, after the Vietnam War and everything else going on, and Ali's now able to come back. And I mean, no, still the Vietnam War still going on, excuse me. Like Ali's able to come back and all this other stuff. And like, it, it's a whole different America now. Now it's like, a revolutionary America. People are seeing things in a different light and all that. And now they're seeing Ali as a hero as opposed to being, the villain as he was in the 60s. But still, his trash talking, if not anything, probably got worse. It got more vile. Like he treated Floyd Patterson really badly. Not only did he trash talk him really badly before their fight, he viewed Patterson as like, white America's like conservative champion. And Patterson did come from a different era, even though they weren't that far apart in, in terms of eras and ages or whatever. Patterson still was from a different time. Ali was from the future generation of what was happening. And Patterson absolutely resented the Black Nation of Islam, hated everything. He said that publicly in papers and wanted to take the title back to America and yada, yada, yada. Ali took that personally, not only talking smack about him, but as you saw in the ring, he tortured him, man. Anytime he could have stopped it, he prolonged it and beat him up more.
Yeah. It was like Ali took particular interest in punishing anybody who had spoken out against any of his views, whether it was changing his name, or fighters who still insisted on calling him Clay, whether it was fighters who questioned whether or not he should have gone to Vietnam, the Nation of Islam. I mean, any sort of any facet of like any viewpoints that Muhammad Ali had ever espoused, any potential opponents who had ever questioned those, it was like he took a particular interest in being an ass to him. You know, like you said, he had called him the rabbit. Like he said, after I get the bear, I'm going to get the hare.
Yep.
You know, stuff like that. And you know, he just and on top of that, just kind of going back to what we talked about earlier, Floyd Patterson was somebody who was more or less, I mean, especially compared to Sonny Liston and then Muhammad Ali, embraced by white America compared to them, for sure.
But just look at that first round. Ali doesn't barely even throws a punch. I'm not even sure if he throws a punch, but that was like a way of just torturing Patterson already, because he didn't have to do a single thing, but he showed that he was in control the entire time. And that must have been some of the most torturous stuff to like even realize, because you're out there and you realize Ali's not doing anything. He faints, dances some more, just moves, blah, blah, blah. He's not doing a single thing, but he's just showing you that he has everything under control and that Patterson can't do anything to him. And he couldn't. So,
well, I mean, it was such a bad style for Floyd too. Like he's like not a big heavyweight by any means, and really all he's got is like he has good power, but is constantly having to punch up at Muhammad Ali, who's just faster, you know, a better puncher, flows better with his offense, et cetera, et cetera. You know, he was behind it, dude. He couldn't get, but
yeah, I'll give you. I mean, you know what's really funny too is that a few years ago, you know that show Pawn Stars.
yeah,
someone brought in a couple of tickets from, I think, the Ali Patterson one, and I think maybe the second fight too or something. And that dumbass Rick, the guy that hosted it, he was like, "Oh yeah, man, these were two of the greatest Vegas fights ever. You know, this was like the classic stuff."
Yeah, dude. Well, and I guess I don't know about all that, but funnily enough, Floyd Patterson definitely does figure into the history of fights in Vegas along with Sonny Liston. I mean,
oh, totally. I mean, but I don't remember them being anything exciting or being all that really competitive.
No, so, not particularly competitive, and more, I guess, hyped than anything. But no, that guy, they say all sorts of crazy shit, dude. They don't have.
Oh, I mean, they had an IBF title belt that they said was Leon Spinks's one time, so there's that.
Yeah, they say some crazy shit when the boxing stuff does come up, which is not that often I see on that show.
But since we're on the subject of Ali, we should talk about one of his opponents who could kind of match him in the trash talking department, except he was an American, so it might have been a little bit hard for you to understand him.
That's true, dude. That's a good point. And thank you for allowing me a little segue to plug my book, dude.
Hell yeah.
No, Oscar Bonavena for sure was definitely, I would say that if trash talk is about pissing off your opponent, if trash talk is about needling an opponent and being kind of malicious too, a lot of the time, definitely Oscar Bonavena was up there, dude. The most famous example, of course, being the Muhammad Ali fight and all the stuff that he said before the fight and at the weigh-in, and I think it was the physical, the inspection, you know, the health inspection or whatever, the pre-fight physical. But overall, his breadth of trash talk, it's wide. It's very wide. And I guess one way to get a decent example of that would be to check out my book, Shot at a Brothel, The Spectacular Demise of Oscar Ringo Bonavena. But even so, there was a ton of shit that I did not include in the book for a number of reasons. Like, I won't get into the editing process and like give it away or whatever, but basically there was a lot of stuff that he said and did that I did not include just because getting into it would be like, it would be too much of an interruption of the flow of the story, because I wasn't talking about that necessarily. Like, I kind of was, but he just did so much shit. It's all like it would have interrupted, like, you know, the flow. But yeah, he, like I was mentioning before, needled Ali about not going to Vietnam. Why you no go? Why you no go? You chicken, beep, 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 chicken. And I think that part of it was Ali, like when he finally understood what he was saying. And then on top of that, he was just like annoyed because he's going beep, 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 beep,
Yeah.
with his like with his hand. And like, it's the type of shit like an older brother would do. I don't know if anybody listening or watching has ever had an older brother, but the type of shit where it's like they know precisely what is going to get you going and they're doing it. And that's exactly what Oscar Bonavena was doing to Ali. So, I mean, he did it to a number of fighters, though.
He was also a headache behind the scenes too. Like you weren't sure if he was actually going to fight until he was actually in the ring. He was known. Teddy Brenner, who wrote an excellent book in the late '80s called "Only the Ring Was Square," and he spends a little bit of time talking about Bonavena and his dealings with him, and has a couple of stories about him. Where I think Bonavena would say, "Oh, like literally he'd be across the street at the Garden, and Brenner would be like, 'Where's he at?' 'Oh, Oscar's sick. He said he hurt his back or something. Can't get out of bed.' 'Wait, what?' 'Oh yeah, he's over there.' And then he'd run over across the house, across the street, run up to the thing. There'd be Bonavena in bed, laying up there with the sheets covered over him, something like that, and saying that he can't get out of bed unless they get certain more money. Then maybe he'll start feeling better. And Brenner would lose it, figure out something to trick them because they weren't that smart on their end, even though they thought Bonavena and his team thought they were being slick. And
Yeah.
you know,
And
he'd get
and
back into the fight.
there would be times when he would do and say shit like that too, but it was like it was tough for him to hide like the smirk on his face.
Yeah, yeah.
He would have a tough time hiding that, like, he's trying to get one over on you, and he knew what the fuck he was doing.
Totally.
And a lot of the time, a lot of the stuff that he did and said was pretty harmless. Like he was just kind of like shit talking, like they're not a good fighter, like I'm gonna knock him out, or I'm gonna do this to him, that type of stuff. But there were a number of times, like for instance, he did it to both Ali and Joe Frazier. What he would do, actually, he did it to a number of black opponents, but Ali and Joe Frazier most prominently. He would lean in and he would sniff and he would go, "Phew, you stink." And he I never heard or read or saw him do it to any other non-black or non-dark skinned opponents.
Mhm.
And so Joe Frazier actually talked about it in his autobiography too. I couldn't quote it, but paraphrasing it, he said something to the effect of when they had met, that like it was for the weigh-in, I think for the first fight, and that he had they'd gotten into the same room, and Oscar Bonavena said something like, "Oh, you need a bath, you stink." And Joe Frazier remarked, like, he was trying to say Joe Frazier stinks. What the fuck? Because he was like saying like exasperated. But he
Yeah, yeah,
even
yeah.
called out, like, I think it was kind of like a racial type of thing with Oscar, but he was just
Probably.
crazy, that he was just everybody dismissed him as crazy. Pretty much everybody. Because he did crazy shit pretty frequently.
Well, question for you though, quickly before we move to another guy. Do you think that had he not passed away when he did, do you think his career was over, or do you think that like he would have worked with Don King and ended up, I don't know, part of that late '70s scene?
That's a pretty good question. I think that his career was probably like on the downside enough because he was having a tough time getting back into good physical shape. He didn't look super great in his last fight specifically. He didn't
Yeah.
look good against Ron Lyle. He didn't
Hmm.
look particularly good against Ron Lyle, and then his last fight was like Alonzo Johnson.
Billy Joyner.
Billy Joyner, sorry. Yeah, that was the one in Reno,
Hmm.
and Billy Joyner gave him a surprisingly bad time. And so a lot of people were surprised by how bad he looked. He wasn't training very well. So I guess if he had gotten back into shape, you know what I mean? Like if he had managed to
Yeah.
actually get back into shape, possibly. But so much of his game was like, mauling and pushing fighters around and stuff like that. And the fighter that they were trying to aim him toward, they were trying to aim him toward two fighters, Ken Norton and George Foreman. And it's like, I just don't know that those were great styles for him at that time. Ken
Foreman would
Norton,
have absolutely just, that would have been bad. Bad.
well, that's another thing too, is he kept calling George Foreman a gorilla. He called George Foreman gorilla for like years. Like anytime they brought George Foreman up, like he was like, "Yeah, I'll fight that gorilla," and it was like, the fuck, bro. But then, they were also, yeah, George Foreman would have just absolutely smashed him. But
Dude,
even
because his style would have been so bad. Foreman would have speared him with his jab. He would have came in and Foreman would have ripped his head off with an uppercut and then skull thumped him with one of his overhand rights.
it would, yeah, and at that time, George Foreman was not afraid of, like, the way that he did like Jose Roman.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
it was just he was not afraid of like getting dirty or just really beating the
Or
shit out of him.
even like post Ali, Foreman was a little weird. Like there's few fights after that, but
Yeah.
when he really got into a rhythm, man, dude would just like look at his fight with Dino Dennis. All right, like the lay he has Dennis on the ropes and he's just going over and over. It doesn't even look like he's doing it powerfully, but it's just and you see the dude's head just going all over the place like a spear and just
Yeah.
knocking him around, and it's just
That's the
brutal.
kind of shit that just demonstrates how heavy his hands were because he's
Because he
not even
doesn't
like
look like
swinging.
he's just effortless
Yeah.
with it. He's just
He's not even swinging. It just looks like
bro.
he's
Yeah,
just kind of
man.
like swinging an axe, but not even really. You know, he's just like, I got a lot of swings to go, so I'm just taking it easy. You know, and motherfuckers were just like, wow, like holy shit.
Everywhere, heads just spinning and going
And
wild.
at that rate, dude, yeah, I mean, at that rate, I think that Foreman would have smashed the shit out of him. And Ken Norton was in good form in the mid-60s or mid-70s.
Yeah.
So that was, you know, would have been about a year and a half, 2 years before he fought Larry Holmes, which was a fantastic fight and would have been his last hurrah, I guess. But, you know, nonetheless, he still would have been in okay form at that time. But also,
I mean, this would have been before, like, if you're talking about when Bonavena potentially could have fought him, this was around when Norton, like, wrecked Dwayne Bobbitt, probably.
yeah, so it would have
And
been
yeah,
like
Norton was in
75.
peak form at that point. Yeah. Norton was, like, knocking it. Norton was looking really good in 75.
Yeah, and the only other thing, the last point, and I do kind of talk about this just barely in my book, but it was another thing that I would have gotten into a little bit more had I had more page space, was I kind of suspect that Bonavena got fairly badly concussed by Muhammad Ali. And I
Totally.
think that now that we know, and I mean, like, well, people might be like, so what? Well, now that we know about CTE, now that we know what those kinds of things, excuse me, what fairly bad concussions can do to fighters, not just fighters, to anybody's brain, to any athlete's brain when they're not given proper rest and stuff like that. Anyway, I won't get into it too much, but I suspect that too. And if that's true, then probably not.
Totally.
But as far as trash talk, he definitely, like I said, if it's about getting under opponent's skin, he was good at it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Just like this next dude, I'll just mention him really briefly because there's not a lot to talk about, but Jorge Luis Gonzalez.
Definitely got to Bo.
That's what I mean. You know, he like when he came on the scene, he was a part of the whole Cuban team from the. Well, he was a part.
Have we ever considered whether or not Riddick Bowe was just pissed off at his fucking flappy mullet?
That is one of the worst hairstyles in boxing history. It has to be right up there, bro. Like he was bald, and then he just had that flappy thing of hair on the back that made no sense, and it just looked ridiculous. I mean, he had a good beard, but like other than that, it was just that thing on the back. So, but Gonzalez came on the scene from what was it? I'd say like the early '90s. Had a lot of amateur pedigree from from being from the Cuban team back then. I think did he beat Teofilo Stevenson? Not sure, but he did beat Riddick Bowe. That's for damn sure.
Yeah, well, he was a massive, Cuban prospect, and I know that he beat somebody. It might have, was it? You might be right.
He did beat Bowe.
Well, and I think that you might be right about Stevenson because he beat somebody in the amateurs that was like, oh shit, here's this big, like he's like a prodigy, when he was coming up, like as just coming into the pros. I mean, like that was one of his kind of like selling points, is that he had defeated so and so as an amateur.
Yeah.
So I don't think it was Bo, because at that point that wouldn't have been, a thing.
Well, he did beat Bo as an amateur. Hold on, I'm actually gonna look it up because I'm kind of curious.
I'm almost positive. If it wasn't Stevenson, then it was somebody else like famous.
Let's see. So, does he have his amateur career? Oh, there it is.
Yeah, God, man, just bless BoxRec, dude.
Yeah, seriously, they have everything. So he did beat Bo. And Gilbert Pierce, that was another name. And he had a very. I know Bo was the main name. I don't see Stevenson here. I thought they might have beaten him, but so since he beat Bo as an amateur, I mean, Bo again, like he made it to the finals of the Olympics, had a very prestigious amateur career himself, but there's a couple of names there that he ended up fighting as, one that he was supposed to fight as a pro, Lennox Lewis, and then Gonzalez. But Gonzalez, after he turned pro, one of the defects after defecting, he was featured predominantly early on television. It wasn't on HBO or nothing, but I mean, he was a heavyweight that was on the rise that a lot of people thought. One of his fights I remember against the faded version of Ronaldo Snipes was one of those really brutal ones where he could have stopped it a lot earlier, but he kind of prolonged it, beat the hell out of Snipes until he was a bloody mess at the end. So Gonzalez had a lot of stuff going for him at this point. Bo was kind of like an influx. He was struggling, like he hadn't really put on too many good performances since losing the title to Holyfield. Sure, he had beat Holyfield in their rubber match, but he was dropped in that fight. He looked like shit against Larry Donald, Buster Mathis Jr., so on. So this was like a fight that a lot of people were looking forward to. I knew nothing about this. Was still in the infancy of my fandom, but Gonzalez was a big talker. Reminded me of a lot of loudmouth wrestlers and the way he was going before the fight. And then Bo was pissed off enough that Bo, resurged himself and looked amazing in that fight. Put on one of the best performances of his career, man. He beat the absolute hell out of Gonzalez in that fight.
Yeah, and it was like fighters had had already started getting like taller or whatever, but he was also like 6'6" or something like that. So that was another big thing with him, was that he was like this big, skilled heavyweight. He could really hit, but he could box too because he's got the Cuban pedigree. So like that was one of the things. But man, Bo wasn't having it.
Nah, man, not at all. And Bo just whooped him. Like that was one of his best performances. That actually knocked him out, man. The way he knocked him out, that was like. And after he stopped him, man, Gonzalez's career completely fell apart after that. Like soon after that, a year later, he was featured against Tim Witherspoon that night where they had the triple heavyweight fights.
Yeah.
Holyfield, Bobby Chez, Lennox Lewis against Ray Mercer. And dude, Tim Witherspoon with that overhand right of his, God bless him, just chopped the shit out of Gonzalez. In that last sequence, just boom, boom, boom. And then you see Gonzalez just dropping a heap. And after that, man, he became a journeyman. Every heavyweight worth a scratch at that point, from Michael Brandt to Joe Macy, Wolf Graham, Alex Stewart, everyone took a turn, beating the hell out of him. So
how the mighty fall, man. How the mighty fall.
Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy.
Trash talk. Well, right around the same time too. We'll just start kind of like shotgunning these, but right around the same time, James Toney.
Oh yeah, you have to mention Tony.
I mean, like right around the same time in the 90s is when I think the early 90s is when he really started kind of becoming more prominent as a fighter. And like, he was busy, and he stayed on TV. But when he really started making his way like to HBO was, I think, when his star power started picking up. And he obviously had always been a trash talker, always been somebody who was quick to be like, I'll whip his ass too. I don't give a fuck. Like in post-fight interviews, he just didn't give a shit, dude. Who was it? Who called him out?
Tyrone Slice. That's one of my favorite things. He said, "Man, bring your ass, Tyrone. We can get busy right now."
Yeah, dude, just bad decision.
Tyrone Slice, yeah, and that was on Tuesday Night Fights. That was the type of thing where they would allow that too. They welcomed that type of chaos.
Yeah, dude, they loved it. But it was like, but James Toney is the type of guy who's like, he will fight you on the spot. So don't, because he's from Ann Arbor.
No, he still swung on everybody, man. Where was it? I think after the second Sam Peter fight, or the first one, whatever it was, where he said he wanted to fight after he lost the fight in the interviews. Hey, what are you going to do next? Oh, man, I'm still going at it. I want Klitschko and his sister.
Dude, yeah, even throughout the 2000s, I remember so I've mentioned this before, but I'll be brief. Max Boxing forums. I used to do some chats and shit with some of the fighters. And on one of the fucking chats, he referred to Chris Bird's wife, Tracy Bird, as Piggy Smalls.
Jesus. I thought him and Chris Bird might have been cool. The whole Michigan thing.
I mean, well, I guess I think it was just at the time he was calling out anybody. Like he was talking shit about Antonio Tarver because it was right around the time. It was like about a year after. Remember, Hopkins and Tony on the cover of the ring, and they were supposed to
Yes.
fight.
Yeah.
And
Totally.
then HBO wouldn't pony up the extra money. They got like 8 million together or something like that, just off the top of my head. And they were like, "No, we're gonna need more than that. Like, we're gonna need 4 million more because we're about to split that." And HBO wouldn't do it, so they wouldn't put the fight together. But it was like a little bit after that fight, and so, or after that fight fell through, Tony was talking shit about Klitschko. He was talking shit about Roy Jones. He's talking shit about Tarver. He's talking, dude. He was just like picking out he's talking shit about John Ruiz before he fought him. Like, he was literally just like picking names out of a hat, didn't give a shit. He was calling people, like, inventing names and fucking slogans and shit for him off the cuff. Like, he didn't care, dude.
I love James. Got it.
It was hilarious. And then Danny Green called him Pig Boy and grunted at him in sparring. That got him mad enough to say he was gonna go get his gun.
I remember that, man, because Tony was the ultimate shit talker in sparring, wasn't he? Just while he was beating you up, he kept on running his mouth and talking, man.
Yep. And Danny Green was like, it wasn't even like Danny Green was beating him or anything. It was just that he was holding his
Green
own.
was getting whooped. Yeah, Green was getting a little whooped up. I mean, Tony wasn't going full on with him. He was,
no. Yeah, like it looked kind of like the Jirov fight, like where he
totally.
was putting in a lot of work, but it like not a lot was landing, and he was like calling him Pig Boy or Piggy or something like that, and so James Toney was getting all pissed off because Green was trash talking him.
Do you remember? I think when the last round of the Jirov fight, right before the last round, when Freddie Roach tells James Toney, he was like, James Mill, it's really close. You got to drop him on his ass really quick now. You got to do it. And you see Tony, and Tony just responds, he goes, fuck. That's what he said. He goes, fuck, like he's all pissed off about it. And then he actually does that at the end of it.
He's like, fine. If I'm going to have to dial it up to 10, fine.
But the way, man, it was so beautiful. And that remains one of my all-time favorite rounds. Like, I love Gotti Ward round 9 and a couple others, but like that sequence near the end, the way Tony sets it up when Jirov gets hurt.
That James goes,
yeah, Jirov is hurt. Oh my God. And then you hear him like,
I remember watching that with a friend, and I remember getting so hyped from Manny's call that we were like grabbing each other's shoulders and like,
To be honest, bro, I think he got more hyped about that round than he did with Gotti Ward round 9, because like he almost felt like a certain,
my God.
Yeah, he had a certain like connection with James. Like, James trained at Kronk back in the day and like worked there and all that, like sparred there. So to see when
Michigan fighter.
Yeah. To see James hurt him at the end doing just classic stuff that like a Kronk fighter would do, just got Emmanuel all tingly. And he was like, the way, like this finishing sequence, he hit him with that right hand to the body. Oh, he's almost there. Boom. And then that last punch, pop. And Jirov finally drops. Toughest guy on the planet. Finally goes down, and he hears
the dude they drop into it.
He's got him down.
They dropped him off in the middle of a Siberian lake and was like, swim to shore. And they're like, part of his training regimen is they tie stakes to him and make him run down a hallway from hungry dogs.
Hungry dogs, yo. Single pass shit, man.
What? They're different, man. They do shit differently in Siberia. That's all I can say. And James Toney took it to this fool. Yeah, there's few things better in boxing to, unite the hardcore fans than Manny Stewart losing his shit, bro. Like,
rest in peace, man. There's never been.
Turn and fight him. You'd fight this motherfucker. Whether it was in the corner, fucking love the guy.
And you know what? He was just a people person, man. If you knew him, even if he didn't know you, he would talk to anybody. He would talk to anybody.
So many stories. And
enthusiastically do it too.
Yeah. So many stories of him having like 5 drinks over 3 hours for just the most like random person. It's some fucking bar.
Well, anything.
In like Indianapolis after the fights, or it's like fucking crazy.
And he would just sit there and just chat and be really happy and jovial to chat with you. Like he knew you for years, man. And man, just one of those guys, dude. You know what I mean? Like Steve Farhood put it best when I told him one time. I probably said this on the show, but like I told him one time, I was like, man, you met Ray Arcel and you met this person and that one and whatever. And he was like, well, think about this, man. He was like, in a couple of decades, people will be telling you the same thing about Emmanuel Stewart. And I was like, you're totally right. Wow. Didn't think of it that way.
Yeah, well, and we'll be talking about him too.
Oh,
Steve
yeah.
Farhood,
Totally.
we already do. I mean,
Yeah, we
Farhood's a
already
legend.
do. I'm very lucky to know him.
Yeah,
But
Farhood's a
yeah.
legend.
So, but that was just, it's cool shit like that. Like Manny, yeah. But the last thing I'm going to bring up, look, there's a few names that we could have talked about. There's Camacho, obviously. There's Floyd Mayweather, who's the ultimate trash talker of the modern era. Vinny Pazienza, Greg Haugen, we've talked about recently. But like, last dude who I want to give some shine to because everybody seems to hate him on boxing Twitter is Naseem Hamed.
Man, it's like I'm sorry to bring this up in relation to me posting things, but for me it's like that's a really good gauge of like fan reaction to a lot
Yeah.
of these fighters and situations. Every single time, dude, like the first comment without fail, Barrera, I'm like, god, dude, he had a whole other career, bro. Fuck.
And he wasn't as overrated as people try to, like, for whatever reason, this modern era, people think that Naseem Hamed and Ricardo Lopez are the most overrated fighters ever. And I don't get it. Like,
Yeah.
especially Lopez. Hamed, you want to make a slight, well, no, Hamed is not overrated at all. No one really seems to like have favorable reviews on him now. I'm the exception. I'm not going to say he
Pretty
was an
much
all-time
British
great.
fans, and that's it.
Yeah. Like, I'm not going to say he was an all-time great or anything, but I'm going to give him his place, man. Hamed was a bad man in his prime during his time. He really, really was. Right? And that was a stacked division. He wasn't fighting cupcakes back then, bro. He was fighting really legit dudes and stretching everybody.
He's obviously vulnerable. Like, nobody's saying he's not.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he gets really undersold now.
Totally, man. I'm sorry. And a lot of these guys today, he stretched a few of them. Hamed in his prime was trouble. He had fast hands. He had one-punch knockout power that no one had seen at featherweight possibly ever at that point.
And just a nightmare style.
And yeah, a nightmare style. I mean, like, sure, he could get hit. He was awkward. He was able to be dropped because of his, like, clumsiness sometimes. But if he really put it together and was, like, taking shit seriously, yeah, man, he was a nightmare. But that being said, his trash talking was some next level stuff, man, because like he had an accent, he was short, no one really knew how to take him.
Spark out.
Yeah.
Madison Square Garden.
Knock you out. You can't do nothing with me. Blah blah blah. Like, and he was just so over the top too, man. So like the the MSG, for instance, like you just said, Madison Square Garden, when he fought Kevin Kelly, another notorious trash talker. Too bad that wasn't around during the Twitter era, because I wasn't living out there, because I would have loved to have attended that fight. MSG was probably rocking that night. And beforehand, you see like both of those guys jaw jacking, going back and forth. But you find out they actually liked each other. Like they were having fun the way they were talking shit to each other. You can see like they were competitive and they were getting spicy and fiery, but like it was almost in good fun. Like Kevin Kelly said that he liked the Prince. Prince, I guess, said they liked Kevin Kelly. They respected each other. They were just both loud.
Yeah, it didn't seem mean-spirited or anything. Yeah,
totally not. But you got this was America's first time seeing Hamed like this, because he had been featured on Showtime before this. We've talked about his fights on Showtime. He was on against Manuel Medina and Daniel Alicea were both on Showtime. Tom Johnson as well. But this is his first time now. Madison Square Garden, his American debut. Kevin Kelly's a well-known commodity. Like HBO, which at the time a lot of people were watching HBO as opposed to Showtime. And this was like the big scene. So like when he has that whole entrance and the way he's coming out, they had the whole pre-fight thing where, like you said, he's doing his whole thing. Oh yeah, I knock everybody out. I'm this and that and blah, 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 blah. And you see the way he's hitting the bags and he's dancing, and he said he wants to go meet Madonna and Cindy Crawford. And he had his big billboard in Times Square, which is definitely a big thing. And then the whole theatric star, right? You see Hamed behind the curtain, dancing. I think he was there a little bit longer than he intended to be. I think there was some kind of malfunction that made him dance a little bit longer than he wanted. But regardless, it got under Kevin Kelly's skin. At one point, you see Kevin Kelly get up there because he's always pissed off. He's just like, come on, get your ass down to the ring. He's yelling and he's like storming around. Phil Borgia, his trainer, actually takes out the pads and like has Kelly try to calm down, like, relax, man, work them. Because Hamed is just doing his thing, right? Finally, the the curtains open up, and then you hear Red Rat, which was like a really good, rap reggae artist in the early 90s. And Hamed starts coming out to that, you know what I mean? Dancing, still being obnoxious. You just see the way he's moving. You want to see him get knocked out. If you're not a fan of the type of stuff, he has the perfect look that you just want to see him get, stomped out.
Yeah, he's
And
goofy looking. So you're
goofy
just like,
looking,
oh, here's this
completely
goofy
over
looking
the
guy
top.
thinks he's cool.
His facial reactions, the way he's like, dancing. He had his brother next to him that was like a twin copy of him with the glasses and everything too. And then when he finally gets into the ring, right, he flips over the ropes, and the first things he does is skip over to Kelly and start talking him in his face again. And Kelly is going right with him. And everyone, I think the late Al Gavin pulled him away. And
great cut, man.
Great cut, man. And then while Hamed's being introduced, and I thought this part was awesome too. Michael Buffer's saying his name, Prince Naseem Hamed. Hamed has his hands up. He's right in Kelly's face, and
yeah,
like I loved Hamed, man. I was a kid when he was out there,
dude. Nobody
and he was fun to watch when I was young. He made for exciting fights.
And nobody ever talks about that fight. That fight's a fucking fun fight, dude.
That's one of the best fights you would find, man. Absolutely. That whole card in general, dude, is one of the best HBO cards ever. Like you had that one, then you had the fun ass Kennedy McKinney Jr. Jones fight before that, which honestly, if Hamed Kelly didn't happen, that fight on itself would have made it for a really memorable night.
Yeah, and probably could have headlined all right, yeah.
Totally. But instead you got Hamed Kelly that just, the knockdowns involved and the dramatics involved and everything, and Hamed finally finishing it with one punch. Like, you can't beat that, man.
Yeah, and the knockdown where his arms like underneath him and shit.
Yeah.
Just like, ugh.
Totally. And that was the reaction Hamed was getting from guys, man. Yep. And to be honest, Hamed was already a little past it at that point. He was still young, but he wasn't taking his career seriously like he used to. And a lot of people that was along the UK scene will tell you that. His prime kind of ended after he beat Steve Robinson. After that, he stopped really giving a shit like that.
Yeah, he'd had training and etc. behind the scene issues for a number of years. Yeah, he was a damn good trash talker though, for sure. And I mean,
even in the ring, man, he was like running around, running his mouth and doing like watch his fight with Jose Bonilla, I think it is. And was it one of those guys? I think whatever. But I think that was his name. Anyways, during that fight, totally just he's dancing around, he's clapping his hands, he's going through it. He's like rave, man, listening to techno music while he's beating Bonilla's ass. Dude can't do a single thing with him.
One of the things he used to do is like he'd be moving his head and shit, and like he'd like slip a jab and then he'd go like that was fucking shimmy and shit. His opponents would look at him like, what the fuck, dude? But yeah,
he's one of the hardest punching featherweights in history, if not the hardest.
Definitely a fucking top level trash talker for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, if he was around today, like who's the top featherweights out there?
Like, I mean, I'm trying to think of somebody who would like match up well with him, but like his style is so funky that like what kind of well, I mean, I guess basically that kind of
Fulton, like Stephen Fulton is a featherweight, right? Is he or no?
I think so.
He is, right?
Well, like I guess the way that Barrera did him, the way that
at that, I mean, here's the thing. I'm gonna say this too. Like the Barrera fought him perfectly and put on a clinic in that fight. Muhammad, that wasn't Muhammad that like clearly you can see he had seen better days at that point because of like we just mentioned. Not to diminish anything from what Barrera did. He probably would have done that any other time if he fought that discipline, but like that clearly wasn't the same dude that you had seen on Showtime only a few years earlier. Or that first came on the scene, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no question. Well, like that that kind of style, that straight-laced style that Barrera used probably would work pretty well against him, but against like somebody like Emmanuel Navarrete or somebody like that,
Oh man, nah, Hamed would have.
No, that's bad news.
Totally. He would have exploited people like that. It would have been a good fight. It would have been a fun fight, but like Hamed would have also just, and you can't diminish that power, dude. Like he was concussive. When he was hitting guys, he was making these guys straight up cry. Look at Billy Hardy's face after he gets dropped. and you just see like his pain. It looks like someone took a bat to him. His eyes are squeezed up, his mouth is it's pain. That's one punch that happened within seconds. Like he was just icing dudes left and right.
Yeah, dude, they're like our Augie Sanchez.
Augie Sanchez, man, poor Augie Sanchez doing that.
Man, he got brutalized that night, unfortunately.
And that was kind of Hamed that started that because, Sanchez, I guess they found out was kind of concussion prone. They diagnosed him with, or like knockout prone.
Well, and yeah, a couple times when he got like laid out,
Well, immediately after the Hamed fight, he came back. He knocked out Luisito Espinosa, but then he fought John Michael Johnson, another hard puncher. And dude, that's another brutal. He was unconscious completely, just laid there, couldn't move, looked like he was dead fish again.
Yeah, it was like he was fine until he wasn't, and then he was just like obliterated.
Yeah, totally. So,
well, I don't have any more trash talkers, but I did find something that I thought was super interesting because I did not know this before. I figured you probably wouldn't know it before, and a lot of listeners or viewers, whichever, would not know this before. So, excuse me, usually when we do the history episodes, before we get out of here, usually when we do the history episodes, I start talking about like, the ancient history or something like that, just because I like to and it's fun. But I did find a little something about Tex Rickard. So Tex Rickard, for anybody who doesn't know, I think his first name was George. In any case, Tex Rickard came to be extremely famous in the 1920s for being a promoter. But before that, many years before that, Tex Rickard, semi-famously, as far as his kind of backstory goes, cut his teeth in the Yukon Territory, which is just adjacent to Alaska now. But at the time, it would have basically just all been one big mass. And it was somewhere where a gold rush happened in the late 1800s. And so a lot of people who were looking to make money fast or whatever, prospectors, headed up to the Yukon Territory. Tex Rickard was one of them. In any case, Tex Rickard famously lost a saloon that he had bought playing cards, playing poker, or somehow gambling. He lost his saloon, and he wound up, after losing saloon, working at another saloon. The dude who ran and owned that saloon, I'm sorry, it was somebody I'm not super familiar with, so let me pull this up here so I can not fuck it up. Wilson Misner. So this dude, Wilson Misner, ran this other saloon where Tex Rickard had worked, I guess. And so what wound up happening was that Tex Rickard kind of looked to this guy who was a businessman and wound up being kind of like a part-time fight promoter, and looked to this guy to kind of learn some of his trade. So it actually wound up coming to Frank Slavin, is a somewhat recognizable name to some people. Frank Slavin was a guy who was an Australian heavyweight in the late 1800s, and perhaps best known for being an arch nemesis of Peter Jackson, the Black Prince. They really didn't like each other and actually got into a few like barroom brawls, according to some reports. And in any case, this guy Frank Slavin fought his assistant. So what? Briefly, I know that I don't want to get into too many side stories here, but just to explain, because things were so different at this time. Often fighters would travel around and do shows. They would like host exhibitions or something like that, whether it was like in an opera house, sometimes a saloon, whatever the case may be, to get a little bit of extra money. And in this case, this dude Slavin fought his assistant, or a guy that he used to go around and spar with sometimes, and also himself was a promoter named Joe Boyle. So long story short, this is one of the first instances I can find where Tex Rickard and this other dude, whose name, of course, I already can't remember, Wilson Misner, got together and encouraged Frank Slavin and Joe Boyle to trash talk each other publicly and to the press in order to hype up this fight. And I couldn't find any other earlier instance of this happening, although I'm sure it did happen. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying I couldn't find any. Mm-hmm. So I found it really interesting that somebody like Tex Rickard, who decades later would pioneer things like building a brand new stadium out in the middle of a fucking field in New Jersey in order to host the first $1 million gate in 1921 between Dempsey and Carpentier. I mean, already a couple decades before that, he was kind of doing some revolutionary shit with the trash talk stuff. So I thought that was a pretty good little anecdote that I found.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I had definitely not heard of that. And yeah, pretty cool shit. Tex Rickard, legendary promoter, and apparently legendary trash talk proprietor.
Yeah, man of many trades.
Good shit indeed, for sure. Well, dude, I mean, we went through, like, we actually stuffed a whole lot of trash talkers into that.
A lot of ones that people wouldn't really think of either. Yeah, a few good ones.
Yeah, I think we got the obvious ones, but we also got some ones that were surprising. So
absolutely,
dude, I appreciate it, dude. Some good shit, man.
Yeah, sure. Man, this was awesome as always, guys.
Everybody, thank you so much for listening in or watching, whichever the case may be. If you listened in to this episode, please go ahead and subscribe, whatever podcast app you might listen in. Give us a little comment or rating, helpful. If you listened or watched on YouTube, also subscribe there. Give us a reply, question. Always happy to answer them. Thanks so much. If you are on social media, Knuckles and Gloves is on both Facebook and Instagram. We kind of hang out on Twitter, probably more often than not. And my buddy Aris is there on Twitter as Punch Zone Aris. Me, Patrick Connor, I'm there as Patrick M. Connor. Aris, thanks, bro. We'll talk soon.
Always a pleasure, man. Enjoy. Later, everyone.